Well, hey kids, welcome to another episode of Grandpa's Farm, and in this episode I'm actually doing a video at request of one of my subscribers. There's always something that needs fed up here on Grandpa's Farm in Alaska, a place where you're always welcome. Come on, Lily, let's go feed. They were on the chat the other night when we were watching the chat given by my friends over at Off the Grid Nation. There's Tommy and his son. I don't know if you can come out on the screen. I'll probably wig out a little bit, but there's my buddy Tommy and his son. And Tommy and his son are planning on buying a new home where they live, and they're looking at buying a home that is near a homeowners association, or in an area of a homeowners association. And so one of my subscribers asked me to do a video about homeowners association so people could have a better understanding of what it is that homeowners associations in fact do. And so that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about homeowners associations and what they in fact are. Let's start out first of all by what is a HOA, a homeowners association. Homeowners associations are generally developed by whoever the developer is who makes a subdivision. The person that owns the land, that does the subdivision, sets the rules and regulations for a homeowners association. That's how most of them are originally set up. When you do a subdivision in a lot of communities, excuse me, sometimes the community, the planning board or the planning association or the local government will have a template, if you will, that you have to follow when you're creating a subdivision. And oftentimes they'll include language that has to be required as part of the rules and regulations of your covenants and also of your homeowners association, if that's the route you choose. Some homeowners associations are set up also by just a group of people in a community getting together to share expenses, common expenses, typically for road maintenance, repair, snow plowing, those sorts of things in a community, beautification projects. So that's how a homeowners association is set up. It's usually set up by the guy who does the subdivision, and it's also then set up sometimes by people who just want to form one. Okay. When these are set up, these homeowners associations become pseudo-government. They have the same abilities and capabilities that the local government has. They have fees that they assess to the homeowners, and they have the means to enforce payment of those fees, which can and sometimes does include forfeiture of the property. So some of these homeowners associations can be pretty testy and very difficult to deal with. It's been my experience that homeowners associations are not a pleasant experience, and I, for one, will tell you personally, I will never own land in a homeowners association. I will never subject myself to that. Okay, so that's how they get started. They get started by them. Now, let's talk a little bit about how they end, and then we'll talk about the middle. Homeowners associations are typically set up with a shelf life. They're oftentimes set up with a 20-year term. They have term limits, unlike some of our politicians, and some of them don't. They're all different. It all depends on how they're written up and what mood the lawyer was that wrote the thing up, or the community that they required. The ones that do have a end date, it's usually about 20 years from creation, and it'll typically require a vote to be dissolved. The neighbors will have to vote to dissolve it. Some of them will just expire. It'll go 20 years, and if they don't renew it, then it expires. Some of them will go 20 years, and they have to vote in order to stop it, or it'll continue, or automatically renew. It'll continue. Or they vote and they end it. It's been my experience that once a homeowners association is created, they do tend to get re-upped and renewed, and the experience that I've had is there's a direct correlation between how much a homeowners association charges and how much of a pain in the neck they're going to be. Up here in Alaska, there's some real small homeowners associations that assess their members, 15 or 20 bucks a year for gas, for, the local Joe Schmo to plow the driveways or to plow the main road out or that. There's some air parks up here that have homeowners associations within the air park for the purposes of maintaining the runways, grading them out, and snow plow, keeping lights on, that sort of thing. There's even a community here in Alaska that specifically was created to make a preserve, if you will, an area where it is legal to be a dog musher, where you can have 200 dogs in your yard and maintain a dog kennel for dog mushing. That's over in the Nick Goose Bay area. So there's all kinds of different homeowners associations. The homeowners associations that I first learned about growing up in New York on Long Island were sometimes like condominium boards or a type of homeowners association where there's everyone owns their own little apartment, but then the outside of the buildings and the gardens and the paths and the walkways were all community property, and so they have very large, expensive homeowners association in order to fund all those things. There are homeowners associations. The most extreme one that I'm aware of, I ran into in Columbus, Ohio, in German Village. It's a historic community. And in German Village, they actually have the right to tell you what color you can paint the inside of your house. The walls inside, what tiles you can use for your bathroom, what colors those can be. Because it has to be in keeping with the original designs of those houses in that historic district. That's one real extreme. Most homeowners associations, though, will have what's known as an architectural committee, where they'll set limits on what type of home you can build, what exterior finishes you can use, how your yard and gardens are to be maintained, and if you don't do what they said, then they can assess you lots of fines and costs. So let's talk about those assessments and kind of how those work. If you're a member of a homeowners association, the only people that can enforce the rules of the homeowners association are the other members of the association. Now, what does that mean? Let's say you own a piece of land that's on the very outside edge of a homeowners association. The guy next door to you who's not in your association cannot enforce the homeowners association rules. Only the people within that homeowners association can enforce that. And in order for them to enforce that, they'll have to have a meeting amongst themselves, and they'll vote and upvote all kinds of stuff, and these guys can get crazy, and they assess themselves all sorts of authorities that they usually don't have. They can assess fines and fees and costs for any number of services. Like if you sell your property, you'll have to pay them a fee to transfer your homeowner association membership to the new owner. And I know there's an aero park up here that charges $600 to do that. You know, all they do is take a pencil, literally take a pencil and rub one name out of the name, address, and contact information of one person out for that lot and write in the new one. And photocopy it and hand it to everybody, and that's it. That's $600. So you got to be careful. But only people within that subdivision can enforce the rules, and they have to do so. If they're going to go so far as to try to take your property, they have to do so within the court system. They have to sue you for compliance. So they have to go to court and file a small action, and you know that can be expensive. You just have to hire lawyers. Unless you're unlucky enough to live in a homeowners association with a lawyer, and typically that's who lives in these kinds of associated areas. Homeowners associations are oftentimes, doctors and lawyers and stuff in there, and it's their wives who, for some reason feel a need to control everything in the world. It's those really whack job controlling type folks that tend to organize and administer and rule over these homeowners associations. Some of them, like I said, can be real simple and real easy to deal with, not a problem. Some of them can be really overreaching, a huge pain in the butt, and very expensive to have to deal with. So if you're going to buy a property, you need to know that ahead of time. Now, how do you know when you're buying a property? Well, do your homework. Your realtor that you're working with should be able to tell you whether or not there's a homeowners association or not. If the realtor is unable to do that, the title company who's transferring the title to you should be able to tell you whether there's a homeowners association or not. The person selling you the property should be able to tell you whether there's a homeowners association or not. Recorded with the county or borough and where you're buying the property at the courthouse, there should be records of a homeowners association attached to that property. That's how they operate. They record, they have articles of incorporation like a corporation would have, and those are recorded at the courthouse, and every property within that homeowners association is tagged in the courthouse as being part of that homeowners association. Quite often, the title companies and the courthouse will require the homeowners association to provide you with their letter of consent that you're selling the property to somebody else. so they can update all the records for everybody. So they can be very, very difficult. Okay, what else can I tell you about homeowners associations? So that's how they're created. That's how they're regulated. That's how they end. What's the advantages and disadvantages of a homeowners association? Well, let's talk about the advantages because that's the smaller group. The advantages is you get to live in a community where everybody is got the same sort of values, whether they're actually their own or whether they're pressed on them by the homeowners association. The houses tend to look nice. The communities tend to be fairly nice and close-knit. Everybody seems to, on the surface, get along, although I'm sure there's all kinds of political tension going on in the back rooms that you're not aware of. It tends to have some harmony in those things, and it also tends to have a tremendous amount of hidden underlying tension going on. A lot of these homeowners associations cause a lot of ill will amongst the neighbors because you decide you want to have chickens and the neighbor doesn't want you to have chickens, and now you start World War III and everybody starts taking sides. Now, with that said, let me address something. In a lot of places in America, there will be sorry guys, something bothered my eye. There will be, the typical situation is it's an old farm. They buy an old farm, they subdivide the property up. So you have the old farmhouse, and you have some of the outbuildings for the old farmhouse, and that'll be usually put as one lot, and then they'll have the subdivision with all the other lots around that. If you're buying in a subdivision that has a homeowners association, and you're buying the original old farmhouse, don't assume that just because there's a chicken coop there that you're allowed to have chickens. Don't assume because there's a hog barn there that you're allowed to have hogs. Just because the old farmstead had all these farm buildings, don't assume that you're going to be able to farm. It could be, and oftentimes they will exclude certain properties in the subdivision. I've seen subdivisions where, there's 40 lots and 2 of them are allowed to be commercial, but nobody else is. This is usually the case where it's the guy who owned the property, owned those 2 lots. He subdivided the entire property. He formed a homeowners association. He made everybody else live within those rules, except for him on those 2 lots that he owns. He exempts himself. Very common to find, and sometimes those are good lots to buy because historically they're exempt from all the homeowners association rules, regulations, and costs. And yet you get to live in the middle of, this homeowners association area. So it's kind of interesting. But don't just assume that, since there's a chicken barn, you can have chickens. You got to do your homework. You got to look at the articles of incorporation of that homeowners association and read and see in there what you can and cannot do. And just realize that with the homeowners association, that can change at any time. The various people in that community can get together. They usually do on an annual basis, and they'll have an election, and they'll elect new officers of the homeowners association, and they may change and update rules and regulations. Typically, when those are done, you can be done what's known as grandfather, which means, let's say you had a property and you had chickens because they hadn't regulated against chickens yet, and now they're going to pass a law saying you can't have chickens anymore. Well, guess what? You already had your chickens before they passed a new rule. You should be grandfathered and still be able to keep your chickens because you had your chickens before that new rule came into effect. You follow that? Okay. Okay, I think that about covers it for homeowners associations as far as I can think of. How they're created, how they're operated, how they're eliminated. They can assess fees. They can take your property. Only people within the subdivision can sue you, or within the homeowner association can sue you for enforcement. It's just a very unpleasant situation to be involved in a homeowners association. Typically, the people in charge of homeowners associations are, these neo-Nazi people that like to super freak control people that want to just control everybody and tell you what you can and can't do. I've heard of crazy things like, a guy puts a little awning on the side of his house to keep the rain off his head as he goes in and out the door. That's encroaching the setback on the property line, and next thing you know, you have to go in and get a variance or a permit or whatever. Because you're violating the homeowners association or local zoning codes or what have you. And I've heard some really crazy things happening with some of that stuff. I myself owned a multifamily property in New York when I was younger. I had some tenants in one of my apartments get kind of frisky on the toilet and broke it. And I had to go in and try to replace the toilet. I actually had to get a permit to replace the toilet because my 3-family house was pre-existing, grandfathered in, non-compliant for my community. So it became a real problem down the line. And that's another thing we're going to talk about is non-compliance. Let me put Tommy back on here since he's the one I'm doing this video for. A lot of properties will be what's known as a non-compliant status. That means that you were grandfathered in. Some rule was changed and you were allowed to stay the way you were. However, when that property sells sometimes, or if there's a change in that property, if you make any changes and you have to go back to the zoning or the homeowners association and their architectural committee, you oftentimes will then have to bring the property up to and in compliance with all the rules and regulations at that point. And they can and will try to enforce that nonsense. So the overall rule of thumb is get away from homeowners associations. Don't live in a community with a homeowners association if you want a homestead. Now, if you don't want a homestead, you want a pleasant place, go for it. But what happens for most folks is, you buy a property based on what it is you want and believe and think today. As you age and grow, as you're naturally going to happen, you're going to get different ideas. A lot of folks that I know of live in areas where they can't have animals and they can't have a farm because, boy, when they bought that property, it was just them and the young kids, and they never thought about some point in the future they're going to want to have a homestead and some animals. When those things happen, it's time to change your location, folks. Get a new address. Find some place to live where you can have those animals. Do not try, for your own sake of mind, do not try to be a farmer or a homesteader on property that's not suitable for it. We have all kinds of examples. There's even a lot of creators in our genre, in the homestead network, folks that will live on a piece of land and are trying to do way too much on that piece of land, more than it can possibly handle. They're running into all levels of frustration. The numbers aren't working for them. I've heard some folks say that, they're not saving any money, having their little farms costing them more than what it's saving them. Well, sure. If you're going to try, Brad and Krista, I'm going to pick on you guys here a little bit, sorry, but if you're going to have a cow on an acre of land, then your expenses are going to be out of whack. Because you're going to have to buy hay, and that's going to make your milk expensive. You're going to have to buy grain, that's going to make your milk expensive. The numbers aren't working for you because you don't have the land necessary to raise a cow. So it's something to consider. Anyhow, this is, I'm going to end this here. Again, this was a video done at request of one of my subscribers. So please like and subscribe, and we will catch you tomorrow. Thanks, guys. How about them toad suckers? Ain't they sappy? Sucking them toads offshore make them happy. Hug a mug of toad suckers way down south. Sticking them sucky toads in zay mouth. I be a toad sucker knowing to duck it. You just find an old toad and you rear back and suck it. Folks, you have a good day. Bye.